In this video, we'll talk about two topics. One is the idea of restrictions, where we have dependencies between components. That means that we will not even evaluate a component unless other specific components have been correctly addressed. The other thing we'll talk about here is how to evaluate tables. If the student submission should have a table, then how can we grade that? So in this one assignment, we're expecting a table that looks like this, where it has some columns with names, and this values here can be anything. These values, they can be anything, but they must be distinct, and the other values must be as shown. Let's take a look at our solution. So first component we have here is we're looking at, we want to check, does the answer include a table? And we have a rubric element type for this. So includes a table with specific columns. And here we can include whatever columns we want. We can add more column names like time, if we wanted time or something. And you can delete columns. Okay, so this will evaluate if the entry has a table like this. And of course, the table can be specified in any number of ways. You could use LaTeX, you can use HTML, you can just use text where you put some the column name and then some spaces, the next column name, spaces, and then the next row is on the next line. Again, it was just spaces. So that the LLM is likely able to evaluate any format of these tables. Now in this particular problem, I was a little bit flexible on the column names. So for instance, this first column could be foreign IP, or it could be foreign IP address, or it could be WAN IP or WAN IP address. So to support that flexibility, I put this component has these ORs here. So we have these 4 different ways we can specify a correct table. Next, we have we want to specify, we want there to be a particular row that has these entries in the row, and here we use a particular query type where we specify the column name and the value. Column name and value, right? So we're looking for a row which has these three columns set to those values. And again, we use an OR because it could be foreign IP, foreign IP address, WAN IP, or WAN IP address, all the different options there. Now, it doesn't really make sense to evaluate this component if the table isn't of the right format. So we want to add a restriction. Don't consider this table unless this one is true. Don't go looking for this row unless we know that there's a table. The reason you do that is that the LM might get confused looking for a row when the table is not there. For example, it may try to say, well, they didn't use the name LAN port, but I'm going to try to guess that maybe, port is okay. Well, there's actually, this table should have 2 rows, foreign port and LAN port. So just port alone is not going to work. But the LM might get confused here. So we don't even want to deal with those kind of issues. So what we're going to do is not even evaluate this unless this one is true. So we put restriction here, and we just put, this is just the first, has the description here, the first several characters of the description. So we just add that restriction there. So now this one won't be evaluated. Going on to the next component, we want to also check this one. And maybe we want to, for sure we have the same restriction, but we might want to have another restriction that it can't, that we wouldn't want to evaluate this one without evaluating this one. So we can add the other one if we wanted to do that. And then finally, this query here is asking, it's just a regular query, but just asking if these two values are distinct. Recall right, these two should be distinct. So we're just going to make a regular query to just say, are those distinct? Again, we don't even want to evaluate this unless everything else is correct. Okay, so one thing we notice is that these entries here are only possible, the only ones listed are the ones that are above it. So let's go to the first component, and look, there's not even the restriction, isn't even an option here. And this one, restrictions in the second one, the only restriction which was possible was the one above it, and so on. So the order of the components matter as far as restrictions go. You can only be restricted on the higher, right? So this component can have restriction on this one, that this one must be entered correctly before we do this one. This one can have restriction on either of these, and this one can have restriction on any of the three. So you have a particular order that you can do. You can adjust the order of components, right? With these things here, you can adjust the order of one component. If you wanted to bring a component higher or lower in this order, you can use these arrow keys. That way, you can do the restrictions as needed. All right. So I want to point out some interesting things here, right? That we have this interesting table and this right, that we can automatically grade this, even though, for example, these values here can be anything, but they must be distinct. So you can do that. You can check for those sort of things in a query, along with validating that the table has rows as you require.